uh, tend to focus a little one-sided. But before we begin, this is When Men Open Up, a show where we are redefining manhood through transparency. My name is Dominique Bond.
And once again, I'm Dexter Perpetrators.
And we have today Mr. Donzell Lampkins. He is a licensed clinical social worker, correct?
Yes, sir.
And can you just give, briefly provide everyone just a understanding of who you serve, how you serve them, and more of an understanding of the type of work that you do?
Sure. So my clinical background is providing therapeutic services to individuals, couples, and families. I have worked with the entire lifespan, and I also have a special interest in working with Black and brown men, and I take a gender-based approach to addressing a lot of mental health issues, and that's just kind of a fancy way of saying I look at how masculinity impacts a person's overall health and well-being, their decision-making, as well as their responses to life mishaps or trauma or what have you.
Awesome. So, the interesting part about that is, on this show, we speak a lot about masculinity and our understanding of masculinity and how it really influences our behavior and our beliefs as well. So for a lot of the listeners, this is not really a thing where we are saying masculinity is bad per se, but maybe our understanding of masculinity can be a little skewed. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
So do me a favor, Donzell. Can you turn down maybe if you're watching the video, can you turn that down? And we're just going to have the conversation as we're doing it right now. My first question for you, Donzell, is there's a lot of conversation about domestic violence being a learned behavior. Can you explain, first of all, what is domestic violence? What constitutes domestic violence? And from your studies, are you an advocate that it's a learned behavior, or are there other factors that lead to this acting out and being manifested in people?
Sure. So to define it, it's basically, and I know that the term domestic violence is used globally, but I know that there's also a move to using intimate partner violence, and so you may hear me say that a few times and interchangeably with domestic violence. And so domestic violence, also known as intimate partner violence, is abuse or aggression that occurs in a close relationship. So this could be with someone that you are currently in an intimate relationship with, or someone that you may have been in a previous relationship with. And so its origins, it's quite controversial. It's controversial, but in short, I would say that based on my clinical experience, there's a lot of factors to take into consideration that could increase one's risk for becoming a perpetrator. So if maybe they were a victim, which kind of goes into one of the things I plan to address later, but if they're a victim of intimate partner violence, then that can increase their chances of becoming violent, as well as if there were other forms of abuse that may have taken place in the home, as well as, not to pathologize it, but if there's a lack of impulse control, if there is a lack of having healthy anger and being able to express that anger in a healthy way, then that can also contribute to not just domestic or intimate partner violence, but antisocial behaviors.
So can you go more into detail when you said healthy anger? Can you go more into detail with that?
Yeah, so healthy anger is really, it's a normal emotion to have. We all get angry when we, experience something, but it's about the expression of that anger that determines whether or not it's healthy. So if if you have a valid reason for being upset, maybe you were offended, maybe you were hurt in some way, shape, or form, the way you express it is important. And so if you are maybe bottling things up, so you're not sharing, you're withholding, then those are unhealthy traits, right? And so and we know that bottled up emotions with time spills over, and so it's important to get that anger out in a healthy way. So if you need to have a stress ball and squeeze it, or if you need to maybe scream in a pillow, or if you need to, some people like to work out or engage in socially acceptable behaviors to get their anger out. We may see guys in particular engage in sports like football and boxing. Those are healthy ways of getting the emotion out. But it becomes unhealthy if maybe our actions become malicious, like if we're on the basketball court and perhaps we have a form of what's called displacement, which is where if we're mad at maybe maybe we're mad at our dad because he yelled at us. If someone yells at us on a basketball court, we may punch them, and that's an unhealthy reaction because we're not even really mad at that person. We're mad at our dad, but because we aren't expressing it in a healthy way, it's spilling over now. So there are healthy ways to express our anger, and there's also ways to that we can express it that's unhealthy. I think the key is really ensuring that you have a good sense of self and identifying what your needs are. Maybe you need to take some deep breaths. Maybe you need to engage in your senses to calm yourself down. That could be taking a cold shower. That could be reading, engaging in some type of distraction technique. That could also be confining in a trusted source.
You brought up something that's almost like a pain point for a lot of our conversation on this show, and that's men who we lack the ability to really express what we need. And so, as a man who does not know how to articulate what his needs are, what are some practical things that he can do to ensure that he's not, exerting that energy in a negative fashion, leading to domestic violence?
I think some practical things you can do, again, is really going to be, I think it's self-awareness. I don't know if either of you know how to dance, but I don't know what it was. It was like a class, and it may have been a Zumba class. I'm not 100% sure. But what I learned in that class was I was really out of tune with my body. Like, I was really out of touch with my body. Oh, I know what it was. I started I think it's called a CrossFit class here in town, and they had us working out different parts of our body that I never even knew could move. And I bring that up because when we are angry, our body will give us signs. And if we aren't in tune with our body, if we aren't paying attention to the place that we dwell in, there really is no hope for us. And so it's important to identify what are my warning signs. So I know when I get angry, I begin to feel I feel like I'm in a furnace and I need to get out. And so those are my warning signs to say, okay, I am upset. And so now I can stop, I can think, and then I can act. And so an acronym that I even like to use, and I don't know that people will remember this, but I like to use the THINK acronym. So I like to think about, is this true? Is this helpful? Is this, is this necessary? Is this inspiring? The I is inspiring. Is this necessary? And then the K is this kind? So true, helpful, inspiring, necessary, and kind. That's a practical acronym you can use to assess, whether your response is going to be a healthy one or not. And you can pivot as needed. You can say, you know what, I don't feel as though I can control myself from yelling at this time. So instead of saying anything, I may need to just walk away. I may need to just let whoever is involved know that I'm taking a time out and that I'll return within a certain time frame.
Now,
and your communication can be verbal, it could be text, it could be a sticky note on a refrigerator. We can be creative in our messaging.
Now, Donzell, this is a loaded question because, we just weren't born like this, you know what I'm saying? So in our childhood, what are some things that typically you see that influences or leads on to this type of anger issue or this type of behavior?
For sure. So I think to combine that question and then the question of like whether or not domestic violence is like a learned behavior or not, I think a lot of people would say that it is a learned behavior. And I don't know that I agree or disagree, but I don't know that should be the focus. I think the focus should be that it's a response to our life circumstances. And so some of those things could be, that can also influence our anger, not just, domestic abuse, but our anger could include poverty. So growing up in poverty, if you grew up in a household that had alcohol abuse or drug abuse, or substance abuse, if there's a form of homelessness or housing insecurity, food insecurity, those are things that really impact that. And then also I would say, power dynamics as you are navigating different settings that you live in, whether it's a parent-child dynamic, whether it's a teacher-student dynamic, if there is, if there is not a sign of respect and a sign of collaboration, then that can cause tension as well. And when there's a power dynamic, usually the person who has the power, whether it's a teacher, a coach, a parent, a guardian, or an adult figure, or even a person of authority. This could be a supervisor. Is exerting their power in a coercive and controlling way that can impact us as well.
Let me ask you this question, Donzell, because you mentioned some stressors, and I like how you attributed this domestic violence to a response. What are you doing in the moment? Let me ask you, as Black men, are there stressors associated with racism that may lead us to domestic violence? Are we exposed to higher levels of societal pressure, that may make us candidates to become abusive?
Definitely. I would say yes to that question directly. There are one for Black men. Others include like finances, education, occupation, as well as interpersonal relationships. And so, all of those things can really contribute to our trauma, because race and racism is a trauma. There's a lot of vicarious trauma that's taking place when you think about the viral videos taking place of Black men being murdered by police officers. I remember being traumatized by hearing an incident where a white guy walked up behind a Black guy who was listening to music that was perceived to be threatening in his car. It was rap music, and so he slit his throat while he was at the cash register. And then, also just like the perceived danger of white men. The fact that the cashier, saw this suspicion of this suspicious behavior displayed by the white man, the white murder, and did not question it, did not, see fit to warn this Black customer, and it cost him his life. And so when there are daily things happening like that, yeah, that's traumatic.
Now, Donzell, another question I have, because this is something that men are victims as well too. What are some red flags that men can really watch out for, and in terms of maybe dating and relationships, of someone who may have the potential of this type of behavior?
That's a good question, Dominique, and I would say that the one that stood out most to me as you were speaking was impulse control. So, in responses to conflict. So, if someone is yelling, if they're using profanity, they're using, degrading language, their tone is degrading or is threatening. Those are some signs to get out. But oftentimes we kind of look past it. We may joke about it. We may minimize it when, in all actuality, it's a sign. I also think, maybe this fight for control. So if there's someone who's just insisting on something being done a certain way, they're beginning to create ultimatums. They're beginning to, create all-enacting statements, or they're beginning to, magnify the situation. Then, those would be some signs that, okay, this person could be someone to watch out for.
And you all, if you are viewing us, we are talking to Mr. Donzell Lampkins, licensed clinical social worker. We are discussing the topic of domestic violence, victims and perpetrators.
I got one more question.
Okay, go ahead.
A follow-up question with that. So there's usually, in terms of abusive, violent relationships, the question is always, why not just leave? Why are they remaining in the relationship? Why are they remaining married to the person, and so forth? Can you go more in depth, because it seems like there's a large misunderstanding that is not always just that cut and dry. Can you go more in depth with that?
For sure, there's a lot of reasons why people stay. There are cultural considerations that people have to take into consideration, whether it's religious this perceived notion that they have to stay for the dad, and that being lumped into it. Other cultural considerations when you think of more affluent populations, especially white affluent populations, there's this huge sense of patriarchy and misogyny, and so a lot of times, if it's an opposite sex relationship, the woman's concern is dismissed. If it's a same-sex relationship, whether it's two guys or two girls, some considerations would include fear of their relationship being perceived as a hoax, and it attacking the validity of them being able to have rights to be in same-sex relationships. And so there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, and some of the other traditional ones would include resources, not having access to the financial means to leave, or self-esteem issues. If someone maybe, have self-esteem issues and they don't really know what love is, based on their upbringing, there could be a lot of unhealthy thoughts surrounding love. And the list just goes on and on and on, as you all can see.
Yeah, once again, we are speaking with Donzell Lampkins, licensed clinical social worker. We're talking about men and domestic violence, victims and perpetrators. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and we'll make it a point to ask that question to Donzell. Donzell, I have a question, because you mentioned some of the factors and why these instances aren't common or aren't reported. Dominique and I, we did a show a few months back where we were talking about this subject matter. The name of the show was "I'm Not Your Punching Bag." Because we were familiar with some men who experienced domestic violence, but the perpetrator was actually their girlfriend or their wife. So let me ask you, why is it that for men who are in this particular situation, why is it that domestic violence is often underreported?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of shame. I mean, statistics show that nearly 1 in 10 men have experienced not just physical, intimate partner violence, but also sexual violence, as well as stalking. And so, for men, there's a lot of shame behind it, right? We're already told that we can't show emotions, and we can't be vulnerable. And so to report something like that, there's a lot of shame, because your perceived strength is now in question. But I also would say that people's understanding of domestic violence is skewed. I think a lot of men may just think, oh, well, maybe instead of just being hit, they think, oh, well, if my eye is not black, or if my bone is not fractured, then it's okay. But there are women who slap men all the time. That's domestic violence. That slap didn't break your jaw, it didn't fracture you, but that's not only physical not or could not consent to it. It could also be stalking. It could also be coercion, whether it's, blackmailing or, digital, so monitoring someone's social media accounts, financial, if the woman is the primary provider, maybe the man is in school and the woman's providing, and, maybe he's using her benefits to go back to school. I mean, we don't know. But these are all things that can happen to men as well. We see it being portrayed with women in media, but these are situations that men are facing every day as well.
Now, Donzell, from your point of view, from your experience as a clinical social worker, what are your challenges when addressing or dealing with a client who has issues with domestic violence?
As a perpetrator?
Yeah, as a perpetrator.
So as a perpetrator, one of the major concerns is acknowledging it. So a lot of times they're trying to rationalize it or intellectualize it or minimize it. And so it's really doing the work to help shift their perspective from, what they think to what that other person felt and what they received from that person. There's, in communication, we learn that it's not, about the intention, it's about the impact and the interpretation of the message. It's what the receiver of the message got out of it, and that's what matters most. And so helping them get to that place of empathy can really help, but those are some challenges. A lot of times perpetrators are apathetic and they are not remorseful, and again, there's also power struggles as well.
Donzell, we're running out of time, but we are going to give you we want to give you an opportunity to answer just a few more questions. Apart from maybe your exterior, your physical injuries, are there any other warning signs that a person may be in an abusive environment, an abusive situation?
Yeah, so some major signs include isolation. So if they go from always being around to, no longer being around, or they're very hard to get in touch with. If you are in person with them, and maybe when the other person's in a room, their body language change. Maybe they go from making eye contact to no eye contact. Maybe they go from having an open body communication to, becoming more slouched, or their body is crossed, or, they're in a balled up like position. If maybe the tone in their voice change, the communication is also important. If you hear timidness in their voice, or if you hear maybe this person asking for permission to do basic human rights type things that shouldn't warrant permission, those would be some signs for me.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I just want to throw a quick question. One of our viewers asked, can domestic violence also include verbal attacks?
Verbal attacks?
Correct.
Yes, definitely. Verbal attacks is definitely a form of abuse, because it has a lot of psychological
Hey Donzell, is there anything else? Because I think we covered a whole lot, and but I still think, with this being such a large and broad topic, we can never just do a good justice with one setting. But is there anything else you would like to share with our viewers and listeners?
I feel like that's a loaded question. I would say that, I would encourage everyone to, check on their friends, check on family members. There's, sometimes this type of thing is hidden because there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of secrecy, and, a lot of cultures promote, just keeping it in house, and so I think creating safe spaces to open up if there are concerns, and I also would encourage listeners to be intentional about the relationships that they're in. Be intentional about what's being normalized and questioning if this is something healthy, if this is something that should exist in a relationship, and if it's not, making those necessary changes. And is there anything else? And I think, I want to say, with this, being, a majority Black space, I mean, I did have the desire, because I think that there's such a movement being done to promote and address like Black masculinity, and so I think that it's important to just kind of say that the impact of domestic violence is strong on Black masculinity. I think that we are trying to destigmatize and remove the stereotypes of Black. I'm going to speak from, me as a Black man, of Black men being dangerous, wild, uncontrollable, being a threat. But when we, engage in intimate partner violence, it further perpetuates those stigmas and those stereotypes. And so I would just be, intentional about that, and not just, for Black men, but I mean for, Black women as well, because we don't want to give people ammo to justify their dehumanizing of us, and I think of us just kind of coming together to address our hurts, our harms, can really help restore the Black community, and further reclaim Black masculinity, and preserve us being strong, being confident, being protectors, being providers. And then finally, one last thing that I did not get to share is there is something called teen dating violence, and so domestic violence or intimate partner violence can start, during childhood or adolescent years, and so I think that it's important to educate your kids on what constitutes a healthy and unhealthy relationship, because research shows that if a person is in, if they're a victim of teen dating violence, they're more than likely to be a victim of domestic violence.
Mr. Donzell, it's been a pleasure having you. We really love the information that you share with everyone. One thing I do want you to share is, cause I like to always leave off with resources and some a hotline that people can use. Can you provide any resources, any any contact numbers just in case if they need more understanding of this, or if they're in a situation or relationship going through this, or anything?
Definitely, if you know, if you find yourself in a situation, an international hotline number could be 1-800-799-7233. Also, there are, I would just encourage people to Google local, resources in your community, because they do exist, and those resources are there to help survivors of intimate partner violence to be able to gain their sense of independence, but also work towards their healing. And there are specialized domestic violence counselors that a person can work with, and there are sexual assault counselors that people can work with if part of the domestic violence was indeed sexual violence.
Donzell, it's been a pleasure, man.
Yes,
We
sir.
really appreciate you. Appreciate having you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, take care now.
Folks, that was Mr. Donzell Lampkin speaking about men and domestic violence. Obviously, this is a very, very loaded topic. There's a lot of misunderstandings, it's a lot to understand and learn. He brought up some great information about the behaviors of it, the things that are influenced by it. It's not just so cut and dry. It's not to say that there's an excuse for it, but there are some things, some factors that can influence that type of behavior. And even for parents, a lot of basically every topic that we speak of, even though it's for men, but the education and the awareness is for young men. If you're a father, uncle, brother, and there's a young man in your life, these are some things that you need to have conversations with, because we're believing that this type of behavior is okay for us to accept in our lives as well.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately what we're trying to do is, one, help the current generation, but then also, we're talking about a lot of these things being learned behaviors. So we have to introduce new information if we're trying to change a generation, essentially. And so, once again, man, that was some valuable information. He brought up something that I remember when I was in the military. The comment being made that men couldn't be raped, because, you're being stimulated. And so I really wish that, we had a longer time. I would like to have asked that question. But nevertheless, we thank Donzell for his contribution. As always, we thank you all for joining us. Dominique, we got a couple of events coming up, a few things that we want to highlight. So,
yeah, most definitely. And we have some webinars coming up, and we want to announce them specifically very, very soon. So for more information, we will be posting more on our social media, but we will be posting more information on our, we're going to be emailing the information out to our subscribers. So if you're not subscribed yet, you're going to be missing out on some key information. So you can go ahead on and log in or register for that upcoming webinar. But in our Stressed and Burnt Out book that's available now, you can get that on our website, womenopenup.com. You can also go on Amazon and search for that, because once again, we are not doing a great job when it comes down to mental health, when it comes down to recognizing the signs of before we are getting burnt out. There are some things that we can incorporate and implement so we won't get to that stage, because we're fathers, we're husbands, we're brothers, and we have a lot of responsibilities, but we cannot continue being productive citizens in our environment if we are constantly walking around burnt out. This is not something that we need to normalize in our lives. These are some things that we need to learn how to recognize, and we need to practice and really implement a healthy lifestyle and habits in our lives so we won't be burnt out all the time. So that is a great resource for the men. We're not just doing videos. We're producing some physical products for men as well. So you can add that to your toolkit. It's the Stressed and Burnt Out, the playbook. We're giving you a playbook so you can win, because there are so many things that's on our shoulders, so many responsibilities. There's so many people that's looking up to us, and we need to be productive. So go ahead and grab that book on Amazon and When Men Open Up, and make sure you subscribe to our email list as well, so you can get more information with that webinar. But if you have anything that you would like for us to address, give us some feedback in the comment section about some things that you probably learned you're going to take away. And you have any other feedback you would like to send to us, you can easily inbox us, DM us, or you can email us, info@whenmenopenup.com. But this is When Men Open Up, a show where we are redefining manhood through transparency. My name is Dominique Bond.
I'm Dexter Pecker.
And we are out. See you all next week.